Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our UCLA Alumni Association Town Hall. I am your UCLA Alumni Association, D'Artagnan Scorza. Proud to be here with all of you and serve as a double Bruin. I have to tell you tonight, we have a really special town hall. I am so excited to welcome a few guests. You know, typically in our town halls, we have like one person from the university to come and talk about some of the things that are going on in the institution. Or we may have like a couple of people that are joined to talk about the issues of the day. But tonight we have a panel for you. So we wanted to change it up a bit. We've been doing this now for a few months. We wanted to bring something special to you about a topic that's very relevant to all of our lives, right? Over the past year, we've been dealing with COVID and the pandemic and its impact on many of our communities, especially communities that were hardest hit. And so in conversations, both within the association, but also in our university community, we realized that this is probably an important conversation for you, our alums. So I invite you tonight to join us in this conversation as we think about sort of what it means to operate in these unprecedented times. And really start thinking about what it means to move forward, right? We're getting ready to open up. You just may have heard the CDC said, if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to worry about wearing a mask, both indoors and outdoors. I think I'm still gonna wear a mask personally, but we'll see. But we all wanna get back to a normal. And the question is, well, what is that normal? Do we want to go back to the normal that existed prior to the pandemic, or are we trying to create a new normal? And how do we take the lessons that we learned over this past year and a half or so, and create a better tomorrow? So tonight, we're going to be talking to some folk who are leaders in their industries, who are also leaders on our campus, about what a post-recovery looks like for us here at UCLA, but also in our communities. And we want to think about how we work together and with this amazing panel of professionals, how we bring in a unique set of perspectives to rethink our future, to think about how we provide access to our university and how we bring in resources professionally to strengthen alumni throughout our country and beyond. So tonight, I'd like to welcome three amazing UCLA folk. Two of them are actually board members of our UCLA Alumni Association. You can go ahead and turn on your mics and turn on your cameras. Cynthia Flores, class of 2010, is an amazing Bruin that I've actually known for quite some time. Cynthia, welcome. Cynthia is the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board member, and she works with the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. She's also an attorney and advocate for social change via law and policy. Thank you and welcome to tonight's town hall, Cynthia.
Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure. Next up is Chris Mclaughlin. I gotta tell you, I love Chris, folk. Chris is absolutely amazing. She's the Chief Marketing Officer for IBM Partner Ecosystem. She serves on the board of directors for UCLA Alumni Association and as a global marketing team leader. When you hear from Chris, you're gonna be just as amazed as I am. Welcome, Chris.
Nice to see everybody.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And also joining us is Michael Moranze. Dr. Moranze is the co-chair of UCLA's COVID-19 Response and Recovery Task Force. He is also the immediate past chair of UCLA's Academic Senate and is a distinguished professor of history here in the university. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I gotta say, Michael, you have the hair and the background of a history professor. So we love and appreciate you joining us tonight, and thank you for just your leadership in the university as well.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So I think Cynthia and Chris and Michael, thank you again for joining. Unfortunately, folk, Jesse wasn't able to join us tonight, but that's okay. We're gonna have a really good time and conversation nonetheless. So folks, we're gonna kick it off with a bit of conversations, and really what I wanna sort of do is open it up for all of you and just ask, you know, just what does a post-COVID recovery mean to you, either in your industry or at UCLA at large? What is sort of a post-COVID-19 recovery mean to you? Chris, take it away.
You know, I think it starts with each individual, and then I move into the professional life. And I think, you know, everybody's had this collective experience, but then had a very individual one too. So I think, you know, as we think about how we're going to return to the workplace, it's really about a changed workplace. And it's about, you know, a hybrid model, working some remotely, working some together, and really thinking about how that's going to come together. And as managers of organizations, what is that going to feel like? And how do we help our team members and colleagues make this return? When we exited, it was very abrupt, and now it's going to be sort of a gentle coming back, but coming back in a different way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Cynthia.
Thank you, Dar. I really appreciate this question because we all know that COVID has been incredibly challenging. It's literally changed our day-to-day lives, the way that we interact with loved ones, friends, acquaintances, family members. And you know, in all of that change, I think it's really brought to light some of the bigger macro level changes that we need to happen in society. So in all of that change, right, one of the things that stood out was how we need systemic change. You pointed out in the introduction, you know, how COVID has disproportionately hit specific communities. And so for me, looking into the future and what brings a COVID recovery full circle is paying attention to the lessons that we've had vis-a-vis COVID, some of the social inequities, inequalities, lack of access to resources, and also paying particular respect to essential workers and workforces that keep us going, even in the middle of a pandemic, thinking about how that essential workforce should really kind of dictate our perspectives, our policies moving forward. As you mentioned, I'm a board member for the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board. Farm workers have been deemed essential workers. And I know that that's something that's informing the way that we move forward with how we service that community.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's such an important, you know, community to serve at this time, right? Professor, please tell us what are your thoughts. What is post-COVID recovery?
Yeah, I would actually follow up on Cynthia's because I think her point is absolutely central that, you know, one of the things that COVID has revealed, I mean, it shouldn't have taken COVID to reveal it, but that COVID made even clearer were the various large systemic challenges and, you know, the ways in which many institutions have lost sight of the larger common good and the importance of, you know, bringing institutions back in such a way that they address that more directly and in a more equitable way. And I think that universities have the potential, both through instruction and scholarship, to help society as a whole think about where it's heading and where it might want to change where it's heading. And it seems to me that those sorts of questions about creating a more sustainable and humane society have to be at the top of any consideration of what's going to come after COVID.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you framing that. So it's this idea of sort of creating a better future for all of us as well. Folk, again, if you're joining me, I am your UCLA Alumni Association president with three amazing panelists tonight, Chris, Cynthia, and Michael, who are all leaders in their fields respectively. If you're interested in weighing in on tonight's town hall and you have a question you'd like to ask of our panelists, I invite you to email Julie Sina at jsina, JSINA at support.ucla.edu. Julie will take your questions. She'll make sure she gets them to us and we'll be able to ask them on air tonight. So again, now thinking about this post-COVID pandemic recovery that we're trying to all facilitate, right? There have been a quite a bit that's sort of in the ether, right? Now we've had the federal government has passed all these sort of stimulus packages. They've given people their stimmies, right? I don't know if any of you've gotten stimmies, but they've given a lot of stimmies out to folk. But in addition to that, we still see that people are facing challenges. So building up on what Michael just shared, you know, how do you see us overcoming these challenges moving into the future? Chris?
I think there's a couple of things. And, you know, my perspective here on the panel is bringing sort of that business thought to it. And I think, you know, what I'm thinking about is when we are going into this hybrid workforce with some working remotely and some working together, is how do you make sure that all the voices get heard equally. And I think one of the things that we experienced is with everybody working remotely, we're all on the Zoom together. Well, at some point, some people will be on Zoom and some people will be in the room. And how do you make sure that you have everybody have a chance to contribute? And I think, you know, those of us who are in the room are going to have to really exercise a new muscle and always be sure that we ask, and what about the people that aren't in the room, and make sure that their input is heard and considered.
Fantastic. Cynthia, go for it.
Sure. So I definitely agree. We need to listen to everyone. I would just add that we need to center our response based on the needs of those that have been more deeply and widely impacted. I think those communities, right, while I'm deeply appreciative of all of the financial support that we've been provided with, I think it just kind of begs the question of, you know, folks have to rely on a stimulus check to pay their rent or to pay their mortgage or to pay for their medicine or whatever it may be. There's an underlying issue here about social inequality, lack of access to wealth, and really coming from an angle where we think about this recovery as not just something that's momentary in time, because sometimes we may think the pandemic happened, we're coming out of the pandemic, but there are so many unresolved issues. And so centering those solutions based on the communities that have been most deeply and widely impacted, to me, would serve as well, not just to come out of this COVID, not to just deal with the impacts of COVID, but to think in the future, right? Like, how do we build a more just, more equitable society?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Professor, do you have anything to add to that or any thoughts?
Well, I think of this somewhat as a historian, I guess. And one thing that it seems to me that we need to recognize in thinking about what we're going to do, and this is true of universities and other institutions, is, you know, COVID is neither the first nor the last such pandemic that we're going to face. And there's a lot of good evidence that it's connected to various issues surrounding climate change. It clearly has disparate impacts based on where you live and the sort of work you do. And that in order to have a society that's prepared for the next such outbreak in a better way, we need to be thinking more deeply about public health in a broad sense, which means thinking about how we provide healthcare. We need to be thinking more about the inequalities in education that begin in preschool and go all the way through K through 12. We need to recognize that, and this is something that I think Chris was sort of pointing at, that it's not just about conversations where part of the group is working at home and part of the group is together, but as we've seen, and you can see this at UCLA, there were real distinctions between those people who could work remotely and those who couldn't. The people who couldn't work remotely are people working in physical plant. There are people working in the healthcare, there are custodians. So, you know, we need to think about a lot more about the way in which these structures could be replaced by others that might mean that either we don't have as many future pandemics or that they don't play out in the same way.
That's a really important point. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so continuing on that track a bit, Professor, you know, one of the questions that I think people are asking is, well, what do you think this means for virtual learning or even just the academic environment at UCLA moving forward?
Well, we're pretty optimistic that we will be able to return to a primarily in-person learning experience in the fall and beyond. We expect to have the vast majority of our courses taught in person. There will continue to be some students who, for a variety of reasons, need remote options for access. And I think that one thing that we've learned is that there are certain forms of online tools and opportunities that can be either brought together with in-person learning, or that can be provided to create different forms of inclusion that might not work as well in a conventional classroom. But I think that one of the things that I think we have learned, and that I think colleges and universities have learned all across the country, is that students want the residential experience. They want the in-person education. They want to be able to talk with their peers and have back and forth with their faculty. And although very high level and expensive, frankly, and labor intensive, online classes can serve a certain function, that in general, both faculty and students prefer the in-person. I don't think this is the second coming of MOOCs.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's right. I will tell you, a lot of my, I teach here at the faculty in the School of Public Health, and I can tell you right now that, a lot of my students want to be back in person. They miss that social interaction. They miss the ability to have that college experience. One of the things that students have been talking about is this idea that they feel like they're missing out in this final year, right? They didn't get to do all the traditional things you do as a graduating senior. And I think that's an important sort of aspect of sort of what it means to be a college student as well, that may have been lost in this pandemic. But that brings us back to this other idea, Cynthia. One of our folk from the audience is asking a question that's specific to you. Given the work that you do in labor, this person comes from Monterey County, and they want to know, like, what do you think about, the impact of what it means to return to doing things in person, to being involved in community, to having family get-togethers, to carpooling, or just getting back to this sense of norm? What do you think that's going to mean for us, or do you think that's going to be a challenge moving forward? I mean, what do you see that as? How do you see that affecting folks, especially in our farming and labor communities?
Thank you for that question. I truly appreciate it. I've had the real pleasure to be in Monterey County a couple of times over the last year. And so I appreciate the question, and I can appreciate Monterey County. It's truly a wonderful place. I think, all with caution, right? Proceeding as the CDC recommends and your local public health office recommends. I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm in line with the professor that we are nearing a day in the life where we can be together. I know the CDC just today said that if you're fully vaccinated, you need not wear a mask indoors or outdoors, which is huge. I mean, when you think about where we were last year, we were really just figuring out how devastating COVID was going to be right around this time last year. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to enjoy some of the same liberties that we did pre-COVID in the near future. I would just say go forward with caution, right? Based on the guidelines that public health providers and professionals are providing us. But I am hopeful that we'll be able to enjoy outdoor gatherings, have some sense of normalcy during the holiday season this year.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Now, Chris, one of the questions that's coming for you is specific to the business community. I know at the top of the pandemic, we were having conversations about the return, right, of business. And so can you talk about, like, how are you viewing sort of a business comeback in this environment now? There's all this conversation about, whether or not too many benefits are floating in the community and there's not enough jobs and all that jazz. But What are you seeing in the business community as the recovery begins to take hold?
Yeah, thanks, Start. And I think there's a couple of things going on. One is just a rethinking of how business gets done. And that starts with this notion of, you know, what work needs to be done collaboratively face to face. How often does that work need to happen? And how can you continue to facilitate people that want to work in a hybrid mode? So work remotely part of the week and be in the office, you know, a couple days a week. So I think that's the first thing. I think second is one of the things that came out of the pandemic is everybody had a chance to do a lot of reflection on what are their personal priorities, what do they care about, how do they like to spend their time. So I think one of the business challenges is how do you engage with your team members in a way that's meaningful to them. So if over the pandemic, they've decided they want to spend their time in a certain way away from work, how can they continue to do that? So you took up a new hobby, for example, or you realize that, having dinner with your family, while it was always a goal of yours, was one that you weren't meeting on a regular basis. And now that you have been doing that for months and months, it's something you want to continue doing. So how can you be flexible in work requirements and how things get done and when they get done, and being flexible. And then I think that the third thing is a very obvious thing for business, which is the physical space. So how much space do you need if you're not having everybody come into the office 5 days a week? And so I think there's a lot of rethinking of work processes, thinking about the people and what their needs are going to be, and then also just the physical needs of a smaller footprint to facilitate all of that.
Thank you for that, Chris. Let's dig in a bit more on that. But before we do, folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you have recently joined, I am your UCLA Alumni Association President, D'Artagnan Scorza, and proud to be here with three amazing panelists. Chris Mclaughlin, who works with IBM, who runs as one of their chief marketing officers. Cynthia Flores, who works with California's Agricultural Labor Board. And Michael Morantz, who's a professor of history here at UCLA. Now, folks, let's dive in a bit more on this as well. So, Chris, you just talked about remote work, right? People are wondering, like, why did it take us so long to adapt to this remote work or telework or telecommuting style? Like, what was the hesitance, and what are we thinking about it now? Do you think the pandemic has finally legitimized the reality that it is okay to actually work from home? How about we start with you, Professor?
I will answer that. I wanted to just come back to something in your previous question about the question of benefits, just to say, and I can say this because IBM is not a low wage employer. If we have an economy where giving slightly improved unemployment benefits is keeping people from taking jobs, then we have an economy that's in a very bad shape, because what it means is that the jobs being offered are not paying a reasonable wage. And so when you hear these politicians saying, oh, you should cut back on these benefits because it's keeping people out of work, what they're basically saying is you should force people to labor for unacceptable wages. But that was just in terms of your previous question. I do think, and I'll be curious what everybody else thinks. I mean, I do think that, the pandemic was a real learning experience in terms of the possibilities of remote work. And, my sense of this is that a certain amount of remote work and flexible work organization was present before, but it tended to be very intermittent and limited. And one of the things that I think people have learned from this, both is the new set of priorities that Chris was talking about, but also that you can have a workforce that is much more flexible that given the possibilities of disease, you may not want to all be locked in buildings together in which you have to get onto elevators to get to the 11th floor. I think that one of the risks and downside for this is my sense is that paradoxically, the remote work may have made it harder for, say, university staff members to keep a work-life separation than they would have before. You know, that as bad as a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 6 situation may be, at least when 6 o'clock comes, you can leave. Whereas if you're working at home, it tends to bleed over and your life becomes much more like a faculty member, which none of us want to wish on anyone. And so, you know, there needs to be a lot of thinking about this, but I certainly think it's been a big learning experience.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Cynthia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate all of the previous statements that were made. I think work from home is definitely an option, and I think it should be presented as an option for folks. I do share the same hesitance about having a full-time work from home method, because I know I surely have experienced that there's a lack of separation between work and home, and maintaining that work-life balance is incredibly important. But if we are going to continue with the prospect of work from home as either, you know, partially work from home or full-time work from home, I also think that we need to think about the digital divide and how to best equip our staff, employees, et cetera, with the appropriate equipment and resources to be able to fulfill their responsibilities under their work, and to kind of substitute that human element, because I'm an extrovert. I love being around people. As Dart mentioned, I'm on the UCLA Alumni Association. This was my first year on the board, and I can tell you, I cannot wait for us to gather in person. That element of human interaction and building those relationships in person is incredibly important. And so if we're going to adopt a more welcoming environment for work from home, there also has to be a way to be innovative about how to substitute some of that gathering, socializing, community building in a more digital world.
Mm-hmm. Chris, what do you think about this as well?
Well, I think the points are well made. And I think when we start to think about the individual, and so there's this re-emerging, if you will, I think, you know, what I'm really thinking about is where people are at, you know, and I feel like we're going to go into this phase of people being what I call whelmed. They're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be underwhelmed. And, you know, people are ready for a change, but how rapidly do you emerge from the cocoon? How enthusiastically do you engage with others? I think everybody's going to kind of go at their own pace. So I think that's one of the things that I'm, you know, thinking about is how do you connect with people to understand where they are on their journey and what is their pace and their level of engagement. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things. And then, you know, certainly, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, you're talking about equity. You know, there's a lot of research that's been done previously showing that those who are in an office environment and around your colleagues and visible to others in the organization, they tend to get selected for special projects, which gives them higher visibility, which tends to lead towards promotions. So I'm thinking about how do we create an equitable environment so for those who elect to work remotely or don't, you know, come into the office as frequently as others, is how do you create an equitable path forward for everyone so that people don't get disadvantaged because they are not as visible as others might be.
Oh, that's a
But
really good point. Thank you for that.
but
No,
I
Michael,
just,
go ahead and jump in.
yeah, I just wanted to go back to one of the things that Chris had said earlier, which I thought was really important. And, um, if we're thinking about this from the vantage point of the employee and not just from the institution, which is that, I think she's completely right that one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that people either had to or were finally in a position to think about what was really important to them and how they wanted to spend their time, and not to sort of be rushing around for all the things that they think that is really important to them. And I think that's going to be a real challenge is, you know, are we going to be able to have a society and an economy that respects that growing awareness that Chris is pointing to, in which people may, and that's one of the advantages of the flex work, is that it may be that it means that somebody gets to spend a day going to the park instead of, as opposed to the sort of spreading of it to 24 hours a day work. But that's going to be very tricky in working out that tension between what institutions want and what employees want.
I think that's right. And I appreciate all of you lifting that up, especially as we think about a post-COVID recovery. Now, Chris, you brought up this question about equity. And equity, right, has been a really important discussion that we've all engaged in over the past year, because I think many of us have realized that what COVID-19 did is it exposed issues that were really already there. I think Cynthia said this earlier, right? That in many ways, the inequities, the disparities we see in our society were laid bare. So as schools, shuttered, as people were sent home and they could no longer work, what it really showed us is where there were significant sort of gaps in our social safety network, where where there were significant challenges in income inequality and earnings as well. But equity is, some people, when we talk about equity, they think about how much, capital you have in your home, or, the stocks you have and the investment you have, right? Equity is still not entirely a clear concept for everybody. So if we think about equity in a post-pandemic sort of world, or in a post sort of COVID-19 world, what does that look like for maybe our students and our alumni? And as a university, as an institution, what is our obligation to helping to support both our students and alumni to advance or achieve equity? Cynthia, do you want to take that one initially?
Sure. Well, I'll speak from the perspective of a board member for the Alumni Association. I think we have a responsibility to survey our alumni about their needs, right, relative to what the association can provide to them. And again, I'm very big on centering conversations, decisions, regulations, policies, et cetera, on those that are going to be directly impacted. And so I think it would be well within our responsibility to ensure that in the ways that we can service our alumni, that we are approaching it from a lens of equity, from a lens of inclusion, and where we center their success and their obvious affiliation with our association, and provide tangible benefits to our alumni, those that may or may not be doing well during this post-COVID time. I think we are, just as we have been, we've had to pivot into COVID, we're going to have to think creatively about how we emerge or re-emerge into society post-COVID. And so having, venues, avenues for our alumni to engage us directly, like these town halls, are great formats for us to kind of get our pulse, the pulse of what it is that we can, what it is that our alumni need, and how to meet those needs from a lens where it specifically focuses on equity and inclusion.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Professor, what are your thoughts about this sort of equity question for our students and alumni?
Well, I mean, I think that, the university as a whole, and here I'm speaking just for myself, but I do think it's true of the university in a larger way. I mean, I think that the university as a public university especially is deeply concerned or should be deeply concerned about questions of equity and about providing resources and support to all of its members. I mean, obviously, it succeeds in this to some extent and doesn't succeed in others. You know, one thing that I think we're very conscious of in thinking about the return to school in the fall, and here I'll speak more about students than alumni, is that, you know, and this I think gets to something that Chris also said, is that it's going to be a psychologically difficult transition for everybody, even those people that really, really want to come back. Because if you've been, in effect, living in your family's house, perhaps with multiple siblings, perhaps by yourself for a year, and you return to campus, and suddenly you're sharing a room with roommates, you're in crowded hallways, you're back in classrooms, you're standing in line for food, there's going to be a psychological issue with that. And the degree of return and comfort with return is going to be affected by various equity issues that were present in the time that you were gone. I mean, some students had much greater difficulty with remote learning because either they had to take care of their siblings, or they had no private spaces, or they didn't have good Wi-Fi. And I suspect that they will be very happy to return to campus, but they're going to have return to campus after a more difficult educational year than other people who maybe didn't face that. On the other hand, those other people may not have actually dealt with anyone but their parents for 12 months. And we all know how difficult it is to deal with your parents, but it still is a different sort of thing when you come back into groups. So I think there's going to be a lot of equity issues with the return.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for lifting that up. It reminds me of this idea of people having their sort of quarantine pods or your bubbles, right? Or not even being able to get outside that bubble. I think I had a friend tell me the other day, what was it, like your corn friends or something like that? I think there's a whole like a language that we developed around this. And it's going to be an interesting transition because we've had to live in this world in a different way, right? Chris, I want to hear your thoughts about this equity question. And then if folks do me a favor and stay tuned, we have a special guest joining us tonight with a special topic we're going to talk to you about. Again, if you're looking forward to asking questions of our panelists, keep them coming. I'll get them in as much as we can. Please email Julie Sina at jsina@support.ucla.edu. Tonight, again, I am joined by an amazing panel: Cynthia Flores, who's with the California Agriculture Labor Relations Board, Christine Mclaughlin, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of IBM Partner Ecosystems, and Michael Moranze, Professor of History and Co-Chair of UCLA's COVID-19 Response and Recovery Task Force. He's also the immediate past chair of the Academic Senate. So Chris, getting back to this question about recovery, about not just recovery, but about equity in our recovery, what do you see the pathways being? I mean, how are you approaching this dialogue, this effort to achieve equity at this time? Oh, you're on mute.
I think it goes back to something the professor was touching on, which is awareness. So simply being aware that everybody's situation is not the same, and recognizing that, and everybody's COVID experience was different. And, certainly as people are coming back together, I think that's one of the things that I want to be particularly attuned to and understanding. And the way I sort of think about it is, if anybody has had a transformative journey of any kind, or traveled to distant lands and you've had all these experiences, and then you come back and you've changed, but those around you are the same. And, you know, you grapple with, but I'm different, right? So people will have been away for, you know, a year and a half. They might be different than when they left. Maybe they had that transformative experience. Likewise, they might be coming back and expecting it to be just the same as when they left. And they're going to find that it's not. And that'll be, you know, a change they need to deal with. And so I think it is this awareness. And, you know, when I come back to the business world, you know, as I said, I think it's for me, equity is equitable treatment of people, equitable, you know, opportunities and access to those opportunities. So as a business person going into this new hybrid environment, you know, I'm making it a priority to be in tune with that and be extra alert to it, and to, you know, draw in people into conversations, help everybody participate, whether they're in the room or they're remote.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Folks, again, remember, stand by. We have a special guest coming up. Before we do that, we're going to do a quick lightning round, and I'm going to kick it off. I have some questions I want you to be able to answer just in a minute or less, and we're going to kick it off with you, Professor. So one of the questions from our audience is related to vaccines and whether or not they're going to be mandatory for all students and staff. First of all, can you respond to that? Will they be mandatory? And then if so, does the university have plans? Do you know if the university has plans to deal with an outbreak on campus or in the dorms?
Yeah, I can answer that. First of all, there's a proposed system-wide policy, which will, assuming it's established, indicates that vaccines will be mandatory upon one of the vaccines receiving full FDA approval. As you know, they're all at this point under emergency use authorization, and what the president's office is proposing is that as soon as one of them receives full FDA approval, the vaccine mandate will go into effect. Even with this mandate, though, there will be exceptions for medical reasons or for strongly held religious beliefs, because there are some that intersect with vaccines and vaccine production. The university, the campus is making plans to deal with outbreaks. There will continue to be a certain amount of testing done, especially of unvaccinated populations in the fall. There are rooms that are going to be set aside if people get sick. There probably will be some baseline testing done. And then, of course, depending on the public health guidelines at the time, there may very well be what are known as non-pharmaceutical interventions, things now like masks or distancing, and you know, people are working on ventilation, things like that. But in case of an outbreak, there will be ways to move students or staff or faculty into rooms that will allow them to be separate and to get well in that context.
Thank you so much for that. I think folks certainly wanted to know, and I really appreciate you sharing that. You know, Chris, maybe this would be a helpful question for you to answer, because you're actually not living in California right now, right, as one of our national alumni leaders. But I think the question that people are asking is like, you know, how do we are we going to be able to get back to a new normal if like outbreaks are happening around the world, around the country? You're in a pretty, you know, metropolitan and robust city. What do you think about this idea of being able to get back to normal if there is another major outbreak? If that even happens in our country, or, you know, maybe we get infected with a new variant from around the world. Well, how do you think we ought to respond to that?
Well, I thank you for asking the question. I think what we've proven to ourselves, the whole humankind around the world, is sense and respond. Something happens, we you know, deal with it. So I think, you know, people are very prepared. Certainly the scientific community is on high alert for these variants. And I think we're just going to have to roll with it. And certainly what we're seeing is, it's different. Each country experiences differently, certainly just within our own country, what part of the country you're in, how the, what are the local, regulations and laws around this. So I think we're gonna have to stay nimble until we can declare this thing is good, over and done. But I think it's gonna be a lot of sense and respond.
Thank you for that. Now, Cynthia, here's a question for you before we welcome our special guest up. Just, people are saying, look, I've been fully vaccinated. I have family that's been fully vaccinated, right? They took multiple shots, either the Moderna and Pfizer or the J&J. Some people took AstraZeneca, right? So they're saying, look, I've been fully vaccinated, but I don't know, right? I'm a little worried. We know that there's some concerns around medical mistrust in the community. You have to speak to that per se. But from your experience, especially looking at the field, looking at the people who are out working, looking at our essential workers, what do you say to people who are a little worried about sort of going back to the way things were?
I say that is completely valid, right? A year ago, nobody, or a little bit over a year ago, nobody in their wildest dreams would have guessed that we were going to be on a full lockdown because of an unexpected pandemic outbreak, a global outbreak at that. So your hesitance is completely valid. And I'm a big supporter of, follow the guidelines issued locally, regionally, statewide. It's incredibly important to communicate and consult with your healthcare provider, community clinics, trusted officials, representatives, et cetera. And really listen to your gut, right? I think one of the things that we've kind of got a theme of this conversation is that we were all impacted, but also individually had to deal with this particular pandemic. And so I think over the last year, individuals have identified those things that work for them, right, for coping. Some of us started baking, some of us were doing workouts at home, taking walks, adopted pets. And so whatever is working for you to get through this very difficult time, continue to do that, incorporate things little by little. It doesn't have to be something where like we're reopened and everything's, you have to do everything at all times. I think listen to yourself, consult with those that you trust, and lean on folks, right? This has been an incredibly lonely experience, but leaning on those friends, family members, loved ones that can provide you with that support and reassurance is incredibly important. I'm speaking from personal experience. It's definitely helped me weather this storm.
Thank you so much for that, Cynthia. Really appreciate that, folks. And so at this time, I'd like to welcome an amazing special guest with us tonight. Carol Goldberg is the Distinguished Research Professor and the Jonathan D. Virat Distinguished Professor of Law Emerita at UCLA School of Law. Carol taught civil procedure, federal Indian law, and taught about tribal legal systems, and served and was appointed by former President Barack Obama to his Indian Law and Order Commission. Carol currently serves on our campus naming committee, which both she and I are working to address some of the issues that have come up in campus naming. Many universities across the country have been embroiled in these debates about sort of how we commemorate and tell the stories of our history through the campus's sort of buildings and landscapes, and in many cases have recognized that naming is a legitimate place where we can engage in debate in the public sphere, right? Where we can talk about the role that historical figures have played in our society and reevaluate sort of what that means. So I've asked Carol to join us. We've asked Carol to come and join us tonight to talk about the campus naming issues and briefly about the campus naming committee. And Carol, give us your take on this effort that's currently underway that the university is engaged in.
Thank you very much, Dart. It's been a delight serving with you on this committee. And I'm delighted to be with the alumni at this event. Some of you may remember that I actually chaired the steering committee for UCLA's 100th birthday centennial celebration, which unfortunately overlapped with the COVID pandemic that you've all been talking about. But nonetheless achieved a great deal in terms of engaging and inspiring our entire Bruin community. This naming committee was charged in August of 2020 by Chancellor Block. It is a broadly representative committee with representation from staff, students, faculty, as well as alumni and administration. And we have a very broad charge. Our charge is to help the campus come up with principles and policies for addressing the very sensitive and important matters that Dart has just referenced. I thought I would just maybe read a couple lines from the Chancellor's charge, because he said, on college campuses, naming physical spaces after individuals and groups with legacies of discrimination or oppression can indicate that certain marginalized groups are not welcome. On the other hand, naming spaces after meritorious individuals and groups from various backgrounds can communicate a commitment to diversity and inclusivity. We hope that individuals recognized will serve as aspirational models for our students. This is the goal that we have. And it's very, very important to our group that the principles and procedures that we come up with be reflective of the values and aspirations of the entire UCLA community. So here's what we're not doing. We're not trying to draft something ourselves and then send it out to people and ask, what do you think? We're trying to engage people at a very early stage to ensure that what we generate and ultimately do present to the community is broadly reflective of the concerns, the values, the views of every element of the campus community. We've identified a series of questions that we want to pose. And these questions are designed to help the campus really flesh out policies that exist at the UC system-wide level. We're not operating on a blank slate, but as is so often the case with the UC system, the policies that they have for namings and unnamings are couched in very general terms. So they talk about things like recognizing individuals that have demonstrated high scholarly distinction and have earned a national or international reputation, or who have made exceptional contributions to the welfare of the university. Those criteria leave a lot of room for choice. And the questions that we're posing are designed to ensure that when we make those choices as a campus, we are truly reflecting and taking account of a wide array of views and preferences. Similarly, the procedures that are set up at the system-wide level give the campus a lot of choices. Who do we want to hear from? What kind of documentation do we want to ensure? What kind of use do we want to make of the tremendous resources at the campus, including the Department of History that Professor Morantz is a part of? So there are both questions of criteria and principles, and also questions of procedure that we're going to be bringing to the UCLA community. And that's before we get to any specific proposals for particular namings or unnamings. And those, I should add, have already been brought forward to the campus, to the chancellor and others. So we're aware that these are pending, but we're going to address those within the framework of principles and procedures that have been first established. So I want to make sure you're all aware that there is going to be a session with the Alumni Association board that is going to bring all of these specific questions about criteria and procedures for their response and their input. We are genuinely interested in ideas. And furthermore, there is going to be an open town hall meeting for the entire UCLA community, to which all alumni will be invited. That's a big group.
Yeah,
Um,
500,000. That's right.
We'll see if we crash the Zoom. Participation is encouraged, however. And that open town hall meeting, again, will present these questions and give people an opportunity to weigh in on what they think the direction should be that we take. What we want to make sure is that at the end of the day, we have namings across the campus that are signaling inclusion to the entire diverse Bruin community. And also that if there are controversial namings that have already occurred, that we have fair criteria and fair processes for re-examining those.
All right. Carol, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to welcome our panelists back for one final question before we wrap up tonight, and invite each of you as well to take this sort of bit of advice away with you. And so as our panelists come back on, Carol, we'll ask you just briefly, just tell us in 20 seconds or less. We've been talking about the pandemic, we're talking about issues related to campus naming. We're talking about how we tell the stories of others. Tell us, what are you doing to take care of yourself throughout all of this, right? How are you engaging in self-care? 20 seconds or less. Professor, let's go with you first.
I watch a lot of TV.
Netflix, Hulu, which one? Disney Plus?
A lot.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So for Professor Michael Morantz, it's Netflix and chill, folks. Netflix and chill. Thank you so much. Cynthia, how do you take care of yourself?
Doing at-home workouts, and I spend a lot of time with my cat.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Thank you. You have a pandemic partner. Fantastic. Thank you. Chris, how about you? How do you take care of yourself?
I am out and about. I live in a city, so I am an urban hiker. So I walk everywhere, any chance I get.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing that. Walking is a really, really, really great strategy. As well, I want to say, I know some of us have put on, much like we talked about the freshman 15, some of us put on the COVID 15 as well. And I know we want to be healthy. So taking Cynthia's, recommendation to work out, find some time, Chris's recommendation, even taking some time to let your mind relax and watching TV are all great ways to care for yourself. Carol, how about you? How do you take care of yourself throughout this pandemic?
My husband and I walk almost 6 miles every day. So I'm another one of these urban walkers. In addition, and this was pre-COVID, we cooked together, which was very handy to have as a hobby during COVID. I started baking challah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And folks, thank you for joining us tonight for your UCLA Alumni Association Town Hall. Again, I'm your president, D'Artagnan Scorza. It's been such a pleasure to be with you all, and we wish you the best. We ask that you do your best to take care of yourself as well, and know that we are here as an alumni association for you, to be with you throughout the course of your life and throughout your journey through our Bruin promise. That is our commitment to walk with you through every stage of your life's journey. I want to thank you all again for joining us. I want to thank our panelists for joining us tonight. Chris, Michael, Cynthia, and Carol as our special guests. And to all of you out there, go Bruins.